Every church, including yours, is in the discipleship business. It's our mission, it's our calling, it's the thing that Jesus told us to do individually, but also collectively. And if discipleship isn't going as well as you feel it should, your church, well, you may not have a discipleship problem after all. What you might have is a design problem or a paradigm problem. Most churches, and I work with lots and lots and lots of churches, most churches are doing their best. And, I want to say that, I want to say that very clearly before we go any further, because when we talk about what's not working or how to make things better, it's easy to feel like doom and gloom. But the reality is that every church I know is trying very hard. They care deeply about Jesus, about the local church, about their community. At the same time, it can be so frustrating when the thing you care so much about isn't making the progress that you think it should. I can almost guarantee you that you are preaching faithfully, that your teams are working hard, that your volunteers are serving, in a lot of cases sacrificially, and your calendar is probably definitely full, right? And yet, many church leaders feel this quiet tension and they don't always know how to articulate it, like people are attending, but the growth kind of just doesn't feel consistent. There'll be new believers at times, but then they kind of just fade away after a month or two. Like mature believers, they tend to plateau or maybe even disengage or say things like, we just need something deeper or different. All of that stuff, right? Like all of that pressure, all of those questions, like underneath all of it, I think the question maybe that pastors ask, because I know I did, is why aren't we producing more fruit? Like if we're planting the right seeds and nurturing and watering, why isn't there more fruit? I feel like we're doing all the right things. Why isn't this working more? And here's what I've learned after, leading for 13 years as a lead pastor. I'm in a ministry now for 22 or whatever it is now. And again, like I said, I get to work with churches all over the world, right now. So here's what I've learned after working with so many pastors and watching so many things work, not work, and all places in between. The problem is very rarely effort, and it usually isn't theological either. And it's definitely not lack of care. The problem in almost every case, when there doesn't seem to be fruit, discipleship seems to be lacking, whatever it may be in that space, the problem inevitably is a design problem. Okay? Most churches kind of disciple by accident, not by intention. I don't want to say that this is what you're doing, but just think about this with me for a minute. A lot of churches just kind of hope people grow, right? We assume that good sermons and some solid programs and there's time, will somehow equal maturity. And listen, sometimes that does happen, right? Often it doesn't. And then when it doesn't, we as leaders, we feel pressure. And it's a pressure that we actually don't have to carry or shouldn't have to carry. Here's where that tension even gets sharper too, right? Participation and progress, those are not the same thing in your church, right? Like a discipleship class is not the same thing as a discipled person. Like a full room is not the same thing as transformed lives or life to the full. Like activity can fill calendars, but doesn't necessarily create movement. So when church leaders, when we don't clearly define what growth looks like or what the next steps actually are, churches, they just default to the same thing, activity, and usually last year's activity with moving the dates. And activity, by the way, can feel very productive because busyness feels productive. However, activity alone doesn't really produce transformation by itself. And this is why I think busy churches can really feel like they're effective, but they're often very spiritually thin. And it is not because God is not present or that he's not working. It's just because we've kind of created some conditions that make growth not as likely or as easy or as optimal maybe as it could be. In fact, this realization, when I was leading at Woodstock City Church, I was a lead pastor for 13 years, and about halfway into my time, I just felt like maybe our our faith growth side of this wasn't going as far as fast as I wish it could, I wish it should. We were really good at reaching people, creating a space that unchurched people would love. And it was a church. It was for church people. But we wanted to make sure the non-church, the non-believer could be a part of this, grow into faith, and then grow in their faith. But the growing in over time, it just felt like it kept plateauing. And I wasn't really sure what to do. So I created this thing that we called the 5 rights. And since then, I've been working harder on it, executing it at lots of different churches. And really the 5 rights is just simply a mechanism that helps turn your mission into movement. And that's really what your mission is, right? Isn't discipleship nothing more than a faith journey of taking incremental steps one after the other over time that moves you in the direction of your Heavenly Father? Well, that's what the 5 rights do. It's just the mechanism that helps you be intentional about your mission. And so here's what we're going to do over the coming weeks. I'm going to unpack each part of those 5 rights. And today, I'm just going to focus on the ends of the 5 rights. In fact, we're not even going to go into detail yet, but we're just going to start on the front end and then talk a little bit about the back end. So discipleship, right? Discipleship works best when leaders can answer 2 questions clearly and upfront. 1, who are we discipling? And 2, what is the right next step for them? Okay, who are we discipling? That's the first right. And the 5th right, the last right, what is the right next step for them? That really is our starting point. We begin with the end in mind and who we're working with to get them to that end. So when leaders can define the right people, it helps begin to clarify the right next step. Now, there's 3 things that happen in between, and we're going to talk about that over the coming podcasts and on my blog. You can read about it there, okay? But when we begin to think this way, discipleship stops being vague, right? Movement becomes, this is great, measurable. Leaders can be really confident about it. And you know what that means? It means the pressure really does begin to lift. So, this is very introduction, right? This is just the high-level idea of the 5 rights. But the 5 rights are the mechanism that will allow you to take your mission and turn it into discipleship movement. So here's what I would love for you to do, just as you begin to kind of think about this initially, okay? This is just kind of the first thought on this, but here's what I would love for you to do. I would love for you to take one group in your church, and in a spiritual group. I don't mean children or the boomers or empty nesters or millennials. I mean, not that kind of group. But think about this spiritually. Maybe it's non-believers or brand new believers, or growing but not really mature believers, or could be the very mature. Whatever group category you want to choose. But choose a spiritual category, and then ask yourself, just about that one category, what does growth look like for these people in the next 90 days? Like, again, take the new believer, right? What does growth for a new believer look like in the next 90 days? What about a mature believer? What does growth look like for someone who's been a part of following Jesus for years, probably decades? What does growth look like? If you can't answer that clearly, and we're going to get to this later and look at all these different categories of people, but if you can't answer that clearly, guess what? Neither can they. And this is what intentional discipleship requires. It's not about more programs. It's just about having clarity on direction. And that's what this entire month is really going to be about. The next month and this series is about. This has nothing to do with guilt or bad leadership this isn't even theory. This is about mechanisms and design. We want to design with high levels of intentionality, because the more intentional we are, the better our churches will be, which means the more we'll overpopulate heaven and grow the faith of the people that God has entrusted to us. So when discipleship is intentional, right, the people will move, right? But when people move, this is important, hope actually turns into momentum. So good news, you don't need more effort. What you do need, potentially, is just a little bit more intention, a little more clarity. And we're going to do that over the next several weeks together.